Quelle tâche?
Thank you very much. I do have a difficult task. We are now at the end of this colloquium, and I would like to thank you all, the organizers, especially for inviting me and to draw the conclusions of this intense debate celebrating the 10th anniversary of the listing of the most important site of the Wallonia region. 2022 was also a very important date for another reason, since this year is also the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO heritage. I would like to start with some remarks concerning the role of industrial sites during these 50 years of the building of the World Heritage. The last evaluation of the presence of industrial World Heritage dates back to 2015 in the Journal of Germany. Number 62 was dedicated to these and included a list of 46 industrial sites listed in the World Heritage, 46% of 814. Since then, many other sites have been added, and the number of sites has risen, but I believe that the number have not changed much. Apart from this presence, we must say that the listed sites have a big merit to have accompanied and anticipated the evaluation of our way to see the UNESCO World Heritage during these 50 years. The industrial heritage have been mirroring the innovations that have been applied during the convention in these last decades. I would like to remind you three very important moments of these developments. The first concerns the application of the global strategy for a balanced world heritage. This strategical reorientation became necessary when we realized that the first years of application of the convention, the World Heritage of the UNESCO was essentially made of cathedrals, castles, and buildings in Europe. And therefore, we decided to rebalance the World Heritage thanks to the efforts of the International Committee for the Conservation of the Industrial Heritage. This was recognized as underrepresented World Heritage, and a new list was published. The second element we must remember concerns the creation in 1992 of the cultural heritage, the natural site, which now the conceptual perimeter of this category has been enlarged. At the beginning, this only concerned the rural parts, the rural areas, and the organization of labor. In 2000, the description of the industrial site Blenavon in Wales marked a deep change, and since then the category of cultural heritage included mining sites that were not usually included and were not included in the natural areas. These were all parts of a process of modernization of the industrial sites. This work was followed by the listing of the mine of Falun in Sweden and coal whales in the Bassin Nord-Pas-de-Calais in 2012 and in the sites of Wallonia in the same year. With these two last listing, we must remember the two last items because they actually opened the way to new practices. Never before some territories were considered as cultural sites that deserved protection and preservation. The mining environment is actually a hybrid environment where the industrial site itself and the wastelands, the infrastructures, and urban areas are part of it. Wallonia is actually a very good example of all these. So actually, the listing of Nord-Pas-de-Calais and Wallonia opened the way to the use of the methodology of listing in series, which was actually subjected to an international meeting of experts in Switzerland in 2010 under the initiative of the World Committee. Since then, the use of these nominations in series have become normal, and that has been shown by the listing of the 3 sites in Japan in 2015, of the mining region of the Bingen in 2019, and in the same year, the heritage Savalunto in Indonesia. We could ask ourselves if it's not too much to give so much attention to the modality of listing in series, but this is actually a methodology that we started to use following the declaration in Switzerland. We realized that this methodology must not be compared to a catalogue of the sites. On the contrary, this has been justified by the definition of the functional links between the peculiarities of the sites. Therefore, the scientific framework cannot abstain from the application of new technologies that allow the visitors to see the characteristic of the sites and the system of values on the base of it. Now, we must not forget the global vision of the sites, and I believe that these 3 days of the colloquium showed us a whole series of the new technologies that we can use, some virtual immersions, some digital tools, or some 3D reconstructions like the one of the Lascaux caves. Each one of them show a new perception that can help in the understanding of the singularity and uniqueness of the site. I believe that each museum, each center of interest must manage these tools, always keeping in mind the main goals, without forgetting to insert itself in the context. And we must try to explain the value. Also, trying to explain the meaning of it, the mission of the museum. For example, when you open the website, the first message that you can see is the following: the museums do not have borders, they are a resource, they are a network. I believe that there is no other expression to resume the real mission of the museums. This mission, I have to say, appeared to be very present in many of the presentations that we saw. And I remember the walking tour of the Museum of Gambe, or the European route of the industrial heritage that was shown by Christian, and I am a member of the committee. Our mission is to develop a network through the creation of thematical routes. We must create networks. That's our mission. Nevertheless, it would be far too simple to reduce the valorization of such a heritage as the one of the Walloon sites to a matter of innovation or interpretation. In the documents that we saw, we could find the main challenges for these 4 sites in the future. First of all, the transmission of the industrial memory, the competitiveness of industrial tourism with industrial policy that is changing, and finally the adaptation of the historical sites to the communication media and language. Many of these experiences we spoke about tried to present some solutions, answer to these challenges, but I believe that rather than evaluating these solutions, we should try to see and reflect upon what are the major challenges for the near future, such as the redefinition of the museums and cultural sites in general. They all know that last 24th of August in Prague, ICOM approved a new definition of museums that, apart from a classical mission, have a whole series of activities that are designed to facilitate inclusion, promote the participation of the community. I would also like to remind you that there was a call in order to improve social inclusion in a proposal in Kyoto in 2019, but this was never approved. If we remember, if we evaluate the experiences, we must remind that we should try to examine the programs for the future. There are many museums that try to attract new audiences, developing at the same time less exclusive approaches. From the diversity of the approaches used, we can see new ways of operating, and amongst them new partnerships with the communities with the aim to contribute to human dignity and social justice, as well as the planet's welfare. This is really a very vast program, and all the museums should apply it, trying to connect directly with the community, or rather with the communities, since the community is just an abstraction. Social and cultural diversity of the society is just a consequence of the distance between the communities with different values that interact in a collective work in the creation of a cultural heritage which is ideally shared, but not always limited by the diversity of identities that have sometimes difficulties in coexisting.
In this regard, I believe I can say that in the presentations which were made, there is a full awareness of the need to define a new approach. Bertrand Gine, or was it Jean, in charge of the Discovery Museum, said that we have to come from collection-oriented museums to visitors-oriented museums, taking as a starting point questions and challenges from visitors and society as a whole. Marie-Caroline Janat, the director of the Mining Museum of Courrières, underlined the changes which happened in the relationship between the public and the heritage goods. The public is less accepting a passive role and want to have an active role. And the conclusions of the workshop organized by the Bois-du-Luc, which I participated yesterday afternoon, in my opinion, were on the same lines when we called for going from a top-down mediation to a bottom-up mediation, to reach out to the public and to promote inclusion and participation. Museum will have to undergo a deep review of the narratives they use. In many museums, there are auto-reference or self-reference narratives. messages drafted by experts and specialists and are not sensitive enough to the expectations and the motivations of the visitors. Today, a museum should have as a mission to be invested. Start from the interest and the stories lived by different communities, heritage communities, according to Fernand Collin, in order to assess necessary mediations to address the demands they confer. If the activity of museums are guided in this direction, if the design of museums must take as a starting point the public and the form of participation of the public, it is highly likely then the number of traditional narratives will have to be reviewed, a daunting task requiring major commitments. In my opinion, the first approach would be to rethink the solid topics of the listing of the 4 Wallonia sites. Those files said the listing candidature was justified given the nature in terms of technical and urban revolution and the defense of social value and interculturality coming from the mass industry by the participation of miners and working class workers coming from elsewhere in Belgium, Europe and Africa. These are quotes from the basic document of the listing. As to the first topic, the one on technical innovation, of course, those 4 sites and the Wallonia mining areas are unmatched in terms of technical innovation, and the materiality of those cannot be replaced by any other digital equivalent. The project of virtual reality and of immersive tools are not in itself a threat to the museums as such, as is feared by museum managers faced with those new technologies, who have questions about the future of wall-less museums. And I believe that the mining sites of Wallonia are going to stay in the future. And by the way, the importance of materiality was underlined properly by Nicolas Berchouen. Apologies for my pronunciation of his name. He underlined the role played by pithead frames in comic books. So this physical dimension is something which is going to stay, which we are not going to be able to do without. While preserving the materiality of those sites, we can also use digital tools to make the public closer to this heritage. We can use those tools in schools or other social spheres in order to offer immersive, interesting representations and be an efficient tool to reach out to public we want to attract to sites which could be valued. In my opinion, we should do away with any pretense opposition because, as Fernand Collin said it very well, virtuality must be based or do in addition to the authentic heritage. And then Romain Jacquet also said what are the advantages of digitization for the physical heritage. So both must coexist. There is no contradiction between a virtual and a physical museum or heritage. If technical and urban innovation puts at the heart of the narrative the role of entrepreneurs in a project to modernize production while integrating all aspects of professional life, the duration of work and so forth. Social aspects demand, on the contrary, a different approach based on other point of view, the point of view of workers, of the working class, of their personal experience working in the pit. So the tragedy of the Bois du Cazier or the yellow disease, the representative of Leward was talking about, are certainly events which deserve a narrative developed from the point of view of workers. And in this regard, I thought it was very relevant what Christian Boll said, and Marie-Caroline, it's handwriting, I can't write it. Janon, is that correct? Yes, yes. So they call to recognize the role of emotion in the museum experience, while taking into account the fact that it must be based on the sensitivity of visitors, their hearing, their senses, their sight, in which the show goes beyond the mere exhibition. So, yes, a right balance needs to be found between the two. And the question of the how sit in the shoes of the other, of the miners, of the working class miners. And the question we ought to ask ourselves, as Marie-Paul Jung-Lut, is that correct, said, sorry for this approximation in the way I pronounce, and then Konstantinos Apostolakis, the role of empathy. Empathy is the means to address those points of views by sitting instead or in the shoes of the storytellers, especially at a time at which we foresee the post-mining era, so the disappearance of the survivors of this era, the miners. Then there was a point on interculturality. This is a very topical issue because the limitations of the industrial heritage narrative self-centers is very full of flaws. The epicenter was in the West, but the understanding of such phenomenon worldwide currently, but are still incomplete if we do not widen our cognitive activity to the propagation effect into other non-European context and to its centripede effect to attract other countries and continents. And here again, thanks to Marie-Paul Jung-Yoder, we saw how new forms of mediation, for example, digital tools, can contribute to disseminate intercultural topics of migration amongst the younger people. As a conclusion, I believe that interculturality, underlining the 4 major mining sites of Wallonia, are the best framework in which, thanks to the participation of so many foreigner workers and the dissemination of their culture of origin, a very strong polyphonic narrative can be told about mining history in Wallonia. And one of the topics broached in the Bois-du-Luc workshop yesterday was the one of the invisible women, the forgotten of the mines, and it's fully relevant in this approach. But please allow me a last consideration on the European dimension of this heritage. Today, our continent, maybe more than any other in the world, is facing an existence challenge, the one of energy supplies. I would like to recall that the places we are celebrating today in the listing on the UNESCO list were already the place of such challenges following the end of the Second World War. Even at the time, there was a major thirst for energy, which was resolved by an audacious cooperation between former war-waging states through the construction of the coal and steel European community that was in 1952. So you can see that 2022 is a year of celebration. The UNESCO listing, the UNESCO convention, but also the creation of this European community of coal and steel, the 70 years anniversary this year. Thanks to this construction, the battle was won. Let's hope that through new ambitious collaborations, the battle for energy will be won again. Once again, let's hope that the testimonies coming from this very place will serve as an example for the future of our continent. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention, and I hope I have summarized the richness of this symposium. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. The interpreter can't hear anything now. Words of gratefulness. Yes, okay, right. So we are late on schedule, but let me take another 2 minutes of your precious time to extend some thanks, first of all, to the mining site for their initiative to broach this very interesting topic indeed. Also, I would like to thank my colleagues from the Wallonia Agency for Heritage for their support in the organization of this symposium. Also, thank you to the speakers for their contributions, for sharing with us their experience, reflections, approaches, and also, of course, thank you that you participated during this 1.5 day of works. I hope that what you heard during this symposium will be an inspiration for you in the future, will give birth to new dynamics and collaborations. And in my thanks, I don't want to forget our interpreters who helped us to understand each other and to discuss. Thank you very much indeed. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. I now turn to the mining site. Marie and Jean-Louis, do you have practical information you want to share for this afternoon session? Unfortunately, the interpreters don't hear because it's not uttered in a microphone.